I welcome you for this React Prerequisites for Beginners Part 1 training course. The agenda for this lecture is Web Application Architecture Terminologies. In this lecture, we will briefly learn about web application architecture, monolithic application, client server, front-end and back-end, front-end frameworks traditional web application, front-end framework single-page web application, back-end frameworks, full-stack development, mean stack, MERN stack, types of software developers, software used in full-stack development, microservices, and micro front-ends. Web application. A web application is an application software that is accessed using a web browser. Web applications are delivered on the World Wide Web to the users with an active network connection. Web application architecture. This diagram here it shows about web application architecture. On the left hand side of the diagram, you can see client side which is having browser, or it could be a mobile phone. On the right hand side of the diagram, you can see server side. This server side is having front end and back end. This front end contains presentation layer. This presentation layer is developed using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Ajax, jQuery, TypeScript, JSP, React, Angular, Vue.js, or Ember.js. This presentation layer is deployed on web server. The backend contains business logic layer and data access layer. This backend is developed using Java, Spring Boot, ASP.NET, Laravel, Python, Scala Play, Django, Flask, or any other programming language or frameworks. This backend is deployed on application server. This backend is able to interact with the database through the data access layer. The database here, it could be MySQL, PostgreSQL, MongoDB, Oracle, or any other database. The user on the client side uses the browser and sends a request to web server. This web server will respond back to the user. This is how the web application architecture works. Now, let us see each and every component of this web application architecture, how it works. A web application can consist of three common layers. They are presentation layer, business logic layer, data access layer. Presentation layer. This layer contains the user-oriented functionality responsible for managing user interaction with the system. And generally, it consists of components that provide a common bridge into the core business logic encapsulated in the business logic layer. Business logic layer. This layer implements the core functionality of the system and encapsulates the relevant business logic. It generally consists of components, some of which may expose service interfaces that other callers can use. Data access layer. This layer provides access to the data hosted within the boundaries of the system and data exposed by other networked system, perhaps accessed through the services. The data layer exposes generic interfaces that the components in the business layer can consume. Web server. A web server's fundamental job is to accept and fulfill requests from clients for static content from a website. The client is almost always a browser or mobile application, and the request takes the form of Hypertext Transfer Protocol HTTP message, as does the web server's response. The examples for web server are Apache HTTP server, Jetty web server, NGINX web server. Application server. The fundamental job for an application server is to provide its client with access to what is commonly called business logic, which generates dynamic content. That is, it is the code that transforms data to provide the specialized functionality offered by a business, service, or application. The examples for an application server are WebLogic server, WebSphere server, Glassfish server. How do application servers and web servers work together? In a typical deployment, a website that provides both static and dynamically generated content runs web server for the static content and the application server to generate the content dynamically. A reverse proxy and load balancer sit in front of one or more web servers and one or more application servers to route the traffic to the appropriate server, first based on the type of the content requested and then based on the configured load balancing algorithm. Most load balancer programs are also reverse proxy servers, which simplifies web application server architecture. Database. In computing, a database is an organized collection of data stored and accessed electronically. Small databases can be stored on a file system, while large databases are hosted on computer clusters or cloud storage. The design of the database spans formal techniques and practical consideration, including data modeling, efficient data representation and storage, query languages, security and privacy of sensitive data, and distributed computing issues, including supporting concurrent access and fault tolerance. The next agenda is Web Application Architecture Terminologies Session 2. I thank you for participating in this lecture and will see you soon in the next lecture.